Oh. Okay, should we get going? I see a few people have joined. I'm sure we'll have a few more joining over the next few minutes, but I think let's kick off because we've got a lot to talk about and get through, and we'd also like to take questions from participants who are joining. So welcome to today's webinar where we're going to be breaking the tummy taboo and talking woman, wellness, and the gut truth. And I'm joined by three brilliant clinicians, GIs, my Pandora Health co-founders, who will introduce themselves shortly. But just to kick us off, I will give a very brief intro to Pandora Health and to myself. So my name is Aisha Pandor. I am co-founder and CEO of Pandora. I am really passionate about women's health, not just women's health, but women's wellness overall. It stems partly from a background in human genetics and trying to understand human biology and how we can use that understanding to make ourselves and each other better, but also partially from my own experience with a chronic health condition and sort of trying to find truth in terms of how to live with the condition, but also live in a way where you're able to be well and happy and productive. So hopefully that resonates with at least a few of you who've joined. And in terms of Pandora Health, we really make women's wellness the center of what we do. We're an AI-driven platform that uses really cool technology to help women like all of you understand and manage gut health, whether it's a gut condition or it's just wanting to understand how to nourish and nurture your gut health for better overall wellness. And our two sort of key features of the company are our platform, which if any of you haven't used to get your gut score, please do. Be curious to know also in the chat if you're willing to share. If you scored high or low or were surprised by anything through the process. So we have our platform, and then we also have our community, which we're building as a space for women to have safe discussions around gut health, but also do it in the presence of experts who aren't just sharing advice, but are also participating and learning themselves. So with that, welcome to our first webinar, and I'm going to ask my three co-founders in the order that I see them on the screen, Aisha, Asma, and Latha, to introduce themselves in 30 seconds to a minute. So keep it quite brief with just a bit around your background and then your role with Pandora. And then we'll delve into a couple of questions.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Aisha, for the introduction. Great to see everybody here and thrilled to be a part of this revolution. So I'm Dr. Aja McCuCutchen. I'm a board-certified gastroenterologist out of Atlanta. I've been in private practice since 2010, always been committed to the community, but I consider myself a chaser and fixer. And so when there are challenges that are identified in the traditional healthcare system, I have made it my job and my duty and my obligation to the community to help to solve those problems. So I've had a very rewarding career, and one of the big challenges that we faced in the community that I serve was basically people not feeling heard in chronic disease states. And those patients that I served were in the inflammatory bowel disease space, and then women in general. So after many leadership roles over the years, I got with two other dynamic leaders in their respective areas, and we formed a company which was Olvi Health. And then Olvi found our sisters and brothers on the West Coast, and then joined forces to become Pandora Health. And so I serve as not only one of the co-founders, but also the chief strategy officer, really focused on how to position this product and get it in your hands.
Cool. Thanks, Aisha. Asma.
Thank you, Asia. My name is Asma Khapra. I'm a practicing gastroenterologist in Northern Virginia in the DC suburbs. And I've been in practice almost 20 years, focusing really on women's health and also a little bit on IBD. And my personal journey started because I've had a long history of GI issues, particularly with IBS. And as my transition to peri-menopause and menopause happened, I noticed that symptoms got worse and symptoms changed. And I realized asking women about those changes was crucial to their care. And so now I have women who seek me from various places because I think they're interested in finding someone who's who understands that. And I really think my personal journey led me to here, led me to Aisha and Latha and Aisha. And I think as the chief medical officer, I think I've learned a lot. I've spoken on women's kind of gut health and the microbiome. And I think it's important to spread our knowledge and to form a community. Community actually is one of the keys to longevity. And I think it's really important in this space. So thank you for having me here.
Cool. Thanks, Asma. Latha.
Hello, and thank you, Aisha, for having me on this, along with Aisha and Asma. As Aisha pointed out, we came together really to help women with their gastrointestinal issues. I've practiced private practice gastroenterology for 23 years, also in teaching capacities at 2 different universities, and decided to switch paths, and in an administrative role at this point, still doing clinical medicine, and very much continuing to be passionate about women's health in general and gut health in specific. One of the things that drives me in terms of what pertains to Pandora Health is not only keeping in touch with what's actually ongoing on a daily basis with our patients, but also what is it that we can do to try and help answer some of the questions, because many of the things that women have suffered with have been sort of taken for granted or normalized, and we really don't have answers for many of the questions. So what we hope to do through Pandora is help women, support women, and answer some questions, but really try and find data to help us find solutions for future. So that's where I'll stop. I'm happy to be here as well.
Thanks, Latha, and we'll definitely delve into some of the work that Pandora is doing, but also just what you're seeing in the broader ecosystem and the kind of shifts over time and the sorts of tools that we now have available to try and achieve that. But I'm going to kick off with asking Aisha a question. Before I do that, in our chat, if anyone does have questions as we go along, or if any points are raised that you would like to just sort of double click on or pause on, I'll keep an eye on the chat. And I will make sure that we have space to do that. But I certainly have a bunch of questions that hopefully will kick us off and get us started with this conversation. And so starting with you, Aisha, and you talked about community and the importance of listening to people in the community. And so I wanted to ask you, as someone who has had a years-long career serving tens of thousands of patients in the GI space, and as someone who speaks publicly and passionately about education and advocacy. Why do you think this conversation about gut health and its connection to overall women's health is still not widely recognized and isn't mainstream as part of women's health conversations?
Yeah, that's a great question. We know that it should be, and I think there is increasing recognition that it needs to fit somewhere. I think one of the biggest challenges with women's health conversations is that it doesn't fit neatly into the historically siloed traditional models of care. So traditionally, women, for example, would, if they had a gynecologic issue, then they would see the gynecologist. If they had a hormone-related issue or they thought it was hormonal, they would see the endocrinologist. If they had a reproductive issue, they would see the reproductive endocrinologist or an OBGYN that specialized in reproduction. And so what happens is when a woman has some ongoing symptoms, she doesn't know who to go to. And unless there is some abdominal pain associated with symptoms, unless there is some bloating, in which case she may then get sent to the gastroenterologist, it was often a symptom that was overlooked. The other challenge was that historically, medicine outside of sort of the nursing field had been a male-dominated field. And I think there's a level of discomfort because the conversations were not introduced by the male counterparts that may have developed or evolved over time. And in certain cultures, having conversations about bloating, diarrhea, constipation, it was either stigmatized or uncomfortable. And so as a result, these taboo conversations were not brought up, and it was not made a normal part of the routine clinical visit. And so I think over the years, gut health sort of got pushed sort of to the back of the line in terms of being a priority.
And so, I mean, you speak about, the system and the place for women to go and sort of have consultations, engage with specialists, and then you speak about the nature of doctors and the field being male dominated. Asma, is there anything about our physiology that also exacerbates the how mainstream gut health is for women? Is anything around sort of reproductive conditions versus gut conditions, or the role of hormones that sort of further conflates this?
Yeah, I think that's where women have, or people who care for women and women in general have difficulty getting good care, because even though it could manifest as a GI symptom, the primary problem could be something, ovarian, or it could be something, hormonal. And so those systems are quite linked. And yet we don't ask those questions to women because, practice is so siloed. And actually most of the clinical research was been done on men. So this information actually is not even out there. So, we talk about hormones causing GI symptoms. So when you have like your period, sometimes you get a little bit of diarrhea, or during pregnancy, you get a little bit of acid reflux. And we know that like when you have children, your pelvic floor takes a hit. But that happens 20 years down the line when you get maybe a little bit of incontinence or some other issues. So it's all linked, but we just don't ask those questions. And I think the research is just not there to make it more mainstream in the way we deal with women and care for women.
And you've all spoken about so far sort of the way things were, and then it seems like, a sort of more optimistic shift. And so Latha, I wanted to ask you in your introduction, spoke about being in the field for more than 2 decades. So what patterns have you seen that have, that signal a shift in this over time? And today, do you still see differences in how men and women come into your office, speak to you about their symptoms, and sort of advocate for themselves? Oh, you're on mute, Latha.
There goes the cornerstone of a mistake we make.
Yeah, we're done with it now. It won't happen again.
I was going to say I could speak a whole hour on that topic alone. I think I could distinctly remember in the beginning of my career, to go back to what Asma was just saying, people would come in and be embarrassed to talk about having fecal incontinence or smearing. And then I would ask the question about their deliveries or childbearing and how childbirth happened and if they had any pelvic trauma. And many women didn't know that the two were even connected, let alone being asked. So I think that phase has evolved to some degree thanks to us educating women over time. People actually come in with more directed questions and definitely are more educated about changes. But to go back to again what Asma said before, research is far off in really giving women specific answers as to what can be done to prevent or treat some of these conditions. In terms of women versus men, as some people have referred to, they're almost completely different species. And I don't think we've done enough to understand the influence of hormones and how the symptoms can relate to that. And what we can do better in terms of women is educating them on learning how hormonal shifts impact their symptoms and how they can actually come to the physicians more armed with information that I can use and then help them. And so I think when a male comes in with symptoms, I don't have to always think about the layer of hormonal changes, childbearing, reproductive aspects, and all the other aspects that a woman's body goes through. So that's a huge difference in terms of the presentation of symptoms, but also how me as a clinician then deciphers those symptoms. Hope that at least sums up to some degree.
It does very much so. And I wanted to just follow that up with asking you in the last 2 decades, if you think about how things were done then versus how things are done now, what are some of the biggest changes? So whether it's looking at health more holistically, as you say, it's looking at lifestyle interventions before prescribing or an invasive procedure. Like what are some of the big shifts that you've seen? And it's kind of, we do this now, we didn't do that back then.
There are two things that I'll point out. One is with the irritable bowel syndrome. I do think that we have more description or understanding of, example, microbiome and more the somatic symptoms and how to manage them, and have more of a clarity on exactly what the syndrome is and how, at least giving it a diagnosis, giving it a name, because in the past they would come in with symptoms saying, I was told I have irritable gut or a gut that moves too fast or along the lines, and really didn't have a characterization of what it was that people were suffering from. Even labeling something actually gives credibility to symptoms, and people are able to manage them and then direct themselves. And in terms of pelvic health, we have come a long way in terms of avoiding, if when possible, pelvic floor trauma, and educating women on how to prevent symptoms downstream or more further damage downstream. I don't think we have enough tools to really help women in a more concrete way so that they can actually, help their symptoms to the point where their social life is not affected. I don't think we're there yet, but we do have some tools that have helped decrease trauma.
Great, thank you. And you mentioned IBS specifically, so I'm going to go back to Aisha on this one. Aisha, you spoke about your experience, specialty around IBS. It is IBS Awareness Month. So I wanted to first ask you, given that we have people with a range of backgrounds who've joined, so some may not know what exactly IBS is. So maybe just to firstly give a brief sort of summary introduction. What is IBS, and then what does it have to do with lifestyle? How does lifestyle affect IBS?
Okay, so I have to tell you that I am inflammatory bowel disease, which is IBD, and not IBS. So I'll go ahead and tell you the difference between the two. So IBS is irritable bowel syndrome. This is a disorder that is more common in women. It is considered a disorder, a functional disorder of the brain-gut axis, although this is debatable. So what that means, though, is that people have ongoing or reoccurring symptoms. And when we look, we don't see any inflammation or any other explanation for their symptoms, but they're experiencing symptoms such as bloating, abdominal pain. They may have constipation. They may have diarrhea. There may be relief with bowel movements, and the workup is otherwise unremarkable. That is different than inflammatory bowel disease. Inflammatory bowel disease, as the phrase contains the word inflammation, we do actually see inflammation. It is what we call a chronic relapsing and remitting condition. So what that means is there is true inflammation that comes and goes, and it's a lifelong condition. It is a disorder of the immune system. So your immune system is imbalanced in those in that particular disease state. And what happens in inflammatory bowel disease is we have our immune system, which 70 to 80% of your gut immunity is in your 70 to 80% of your immunity lies in your gut. And then you have your microbiome, which outnumbers our own human genetic DNA by 150 times. And they're separated by this razor thin layer of cells. And so when you have a disturbance in your microbiome, or if your body starts this vicious cycle of reacting to the microbiome, you get a break in that barrier, that separation of that little line of cells, and you get this ongoing inflammation. That's what happens in inflammatory bowel disease. Irritable bowel is just very annoying for our women, and I'll let Asma chime in here because I know she is very passionate about irritable bowel, but it is a brain gut disorder. And it is very bothersome to women in particular, just because of the incident. And what I always tell patients is if you don't feel good here, then you don't feel good in your gut. And it's a bidirectional communication between the brain and your gut. So it's this two-way axis, they're best friends. And when there's a disturbance in either of them, then you can experience various symptoms, depression, all the way down to your gut symptoms that I named before. So it's important to recognize that these are two distinct entities, and my patients often do get them sort of confused as well, because it's IBD versus IBS. And unless you're a gastroenterologist, definitely you may confuse the two of those. But it is IBS Awareness Month, and we have a lot of materials. Asma posted a fantastic overview of IBS on our community page. So if you have not seen that, please go and check that out.
Great, thank you. Thanks for laying that out so well. And so, Asma, maybe talk about lifestyle, and maybe some sort of lifestyle interventions that you think about when you're consulting with patients with irritable bowel.
So I think you have to think about IBS very holistically. Like, you can't just do one thing to improve it. You really have to think about it as like a multi-pronged intervention. So basics include things like having a good diet, avoiding things that like trigger your symptoms. So if you're having a lot of diarrhea and you drink 4 cups of coffee a day, then coffee's a laxative. It's going to give you diarrhea. So you really have to adjust your diet. There's actually diets now that, such as the low FODMAP diet, that actually have been validated for IBS. And there's actually things that you can do to improve it based on just diet. Sleep is another big one we don't talk enough about. I think getting a good amount of sleep, 6 to 8 hours a night, if you can, really will also help your symptoms. Exercise, we talk about exercise in many ways. It releases endorphins. It makes your brain feel better, which ultimately will help your gut as well. And also, if you're suffering from constipation, one of the best things you can do is run. So I think or just walk, briskly, or doing something to move your body, your guts, and muscles. So the more you move, the more it moves. And then I think one of the things I want to emphasize is that because IBS, traditionally, people have walked into my office and been like, I have IBS. I know there's nothing you can do for me. That's totally not true anymore. There's actually algorithms by GI societies that lay out how to treat it. And it includes all of this, including medications. But one big thing is called kind of psychologic therapies, like gut-directed hypnosis and cognitive behavioral therapies, where you literally retrain your brain from feeling pain and from retrain your body to have a different response to what it traditionally would think. So there's so many things to do, and the more you do them together, the better off people feel. And I think you need a really good, I hope this, talking to people who've had the problem is really helpful, because they give you tricks and tips of the trade. And that's why I like the community circle, because it really, you may find one thing that really helps and someone just said it to you. And that's kind of what happened with me. And so I think it's really important to discuss.
I love, that you talk about, holistic health. It's obviously one of the things with Pandora that we've really focused on. The idea that we it's not just diet or just exercise or just supplements, and it's all of these things, and sort of taking into account the individual. Aisha, you had your hand up.
That was an accident. Sorry.
Okay,
you can chime in.
And then, so I wanted to ask you about diet specifically, and there are all of these diets that seem to have their moment over time, right? And I often think about diet. People talk about diet in the context of weight or exercise or maintaining a particular physique or longevity even. But, how does diet come into the picture? And, if someone comes to you and says, I'm thinking of following a keto diet or a carnivore diet, how does specific diets and sort of dietary trends enter into the picture? And how do you tackle that?
So that's a great question. And I think the way I tackle diet has changed over time as we've learned more about diet, because that's a really great area of exploration. My baseline now has become that everyone should follow a Mediterranean diet, because that the gut microbiome has the most benefit, and the gut microbiome is basically the more variety of plants you eat, and the more plants you eat, the better your microbiome is. And the Mediterranean diet has been shown to prevent chronic disease because it improves your microbiome. So I think as a baseline, you take that as your baseline, and then you take on top of it what kind of you're worried about. So if you're worried about weight loss and you're a postmenopausal woman and you're like, I can't lose weight, but I want to eat more protein, then you kind of change the diet to favor some of those things. Or, say you have IBS and you really need to be gluten-free. So you take that out of the diet and you replace it with something else. So I think if you use that as your kind of guiding light, and then you take whatever is your real concern and you add it on top, it's really, I think, a good way to approach diet, and you say weight loss. So you know what, I'll, take the things that I think are contributing to my weight loss out and, really decrease my fats or my sugars, even if I have a small amount or whatever it is that you do. And I think that's a great way to kind of approach diet. But that's kind of $1 million question. I think diet is a huge area of exploration.
It does seem though like more of the research points towards, just variety, whole foods, good balance, importance of fiber, fermented foods.
And they're talking about low additives, now avoiding emulsifiers. That's sort of the new wave of the microbiome research. And so you'll see, I think, more of these things coming out over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I want to ask Aisha maybe a question about processed foods and the sort of the food industry at the moment and labels, because I know that she has some opinions on just what you see in the shop nowadays. But before that, Latha, I want to ask you about testing and like how do you monitor? How do you know what's actually going on in your gut? So there's how you feel. There is whether you have any specific symptoms or not. There are things like microbiome, kits that you can use to get a bit of an idea into what's going on in there. What do you advise and not advise that people do at home versus with, in consultation with a healthcare professional? And maybe talk about what is available.
Yeah, again, that's such a broad question. Each of these topics can have their own podcasts or series of lectures. In terms of what can be done in testing, as a gastroenterologist, all three of us here have done many endoscopies, thousands of endoscopies, which basically are looking at the inside lining and looking for inflammation, et cetera. So one of the things we do when people have symptoms or are suffering with issues is pursue blood tests, stool tests, and endoscopies for biopsy to rule out certain things like celiac disease or inflammatory bowel disease, and make sure that there is nothing that's sort of representing or mimicking symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome. In terms of what can people do at home, so the sort of a disclaimer I'm putting in there is if you have real symptoms, make sure to speak with the clinician and make sure that the right tests are done. Once that's done and you're just curious or want to know what your symptoms are from or what's going on in your gut, yes, there are multiple tests out there. I wouldn't endorse or recommend any one of them highly, but there are multiple microbiome tests at this point that I think are of use. And one of the issues that I have with anything that's out there is, again, as I said before, none of them have been specifically vetted or tested for women or for hormonal shifts. So there are breath tests that are at-home breath tests. There are microbiome tests, and both of these can perhaps give us answers on trends that we see within our gut. Breath test is something that we do recommend to our patients to look for something called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And that's a specific one, again, needs to be treated by a clinician. So again, goes back to the first thing that I said is to make sure you speak with a clinician. There are multiple tests people have been getting through naturopathic physicians as well. And those, again, have different aspects that one are testing for. So what I'm trying to get at this point is that it's exciting at this moment that there are a lot of tests that will soon become available and hopefully more validated and in hands of people, because I do feel empowering women with at-home tests and meeting people where they are, and it makes it much more easier to gather information, insights into their own health, and hopefully make recommendations that are personalized. But we're not quite there yet. So that's a sort of a broad, long answer with no clear answer.
I think what is really illuminating is that there are many interventions. There are many different things that you can do, some of which are, standard practice and are clinically and scientifically validated, some that are newer and maybe more fringe. And yeah, I think, also important to sort of be careful in terms of what you're using and how much trust to place in it. I see Vicky's answered your question, Aisha. And she says, for women of a certain age, 60 plus, the recommendation is to add a lot of protein to your diet, as well as other supplements such as creatine. The issue is that it's difficult to digest red meat, for example. With so many recommendations out there, it would be nice to know how to proceed in your dietary choices if you suffer from IBS or have other gut issues. Do you want to comment a bit on that? And then also maybe talk about, food additives, bioengineered foods, emulsifiers, all of that fun stuff.
Yeah, I think the comment / question from Vicky really illuminates the fact that we do have to individualize and personalize these recommendations. So, we can't necessarily broadly say that all women over 60 need creatine, because there may be some women, for example, that suffer from, by this time, chronic kidney disease, in which case we would be very careful with some of these additives, or we would be very careful with a high protein diet. What we do typically universally recommend, though, for women over 60 is that they do incorporate some strength training into their regimen. And that has been shown to help to maintain muscle mass, which I think, the recommendation for protein and creatine is leaning towards. But again, we have to individualize this. So depending on sort of the person's level of activity, their overall health, for example, in our platform, we would take all things into consideration, including other conditions that they're suffering for, and then customize a plan, which may include some recommendations or supplements if they're not naturally able to get those in the diet. Along that same vein, I would say that, the inability to digest red meat, we do want to limit the red meat in a given week. Red meat, for example, has a lot of heme, and when it's exposed to heat, then that can be potentially a carcinogen. And we know that a high red meat diet is linked to multiple inflammatory conditions as well as cancers, including colorectal cancer. So I tell my patients, basically, you want to have a colorful plate in terms of red meat, make it one time a week. The World Health Organization at one point recommended less than 3 ounces per week. Take all recommendations with a grain of salt. I think we need to individualize this. That's why we have a gut guru. We have a lot of other resources on Pandora where you can take your particular clinical situation and your lifestyle and your family history and integrate all of that into a holistic recommendation that is really suitable and safe for you. You asked me about a very charging question. I'll try to stay out of the superlative.
Can I actually let me ask? So I've got a follow up to that, and then let's get into the meat, so to speak, of the additive one. But I think so. So how would you? And I think people are talking about keto diet. They're talking about the carnivore diet, which is essentially just meat, right? Meat and fat. How do you respond to patients who come in and say, I would like to switch over to this diet?
I think we have to be so careful. If our meats were clean, if we were truly hunters and gatherers like we used to be, and we had, we were eating from the earth and shooting our prey and cooking it the way we used to, and we had, periods of feast and periods of famine, it may not be an issue. And so I don't think that meat is necessarily the enemy, but the way that meat is so processed these days. I don't know if I should say this or not say this, but I had a gentleman to come into my office, and he essentially had an organic beef or cattle farm. And I said, hey, why don't we barter? I can do your procedure. You can give me some of the beef. And he said, you wouldn't even eat it. And I said, why? And he said, it tastes absolutely nothing like the beef that you've tasted, like the cattle that you've tasted. And I see that Dr. Tamarisa has raised her hand, so I'm going to let her hop in here, because Dr. Tamarisa has an integrative clinic. She's a gastroenterologist out of Katy and has done phenomenally well with treating the whole patient. But But anyway, that he said, once it is organic to a certain extent and then it's sent off somewhere else, and then we don't exactly know what happens to it. So it's the processing, it is the fat that's in there, it is all of the additives, the way that they have to preserve the meat in order to keep it on the shelves, that causes a pro-inflammatory state. There's also, for the strict vegans, there's some ethical potential issues around this as well. So I think we have to be very careful with these keto diets, and people don't drink enough water. So when they go on the keto diets, they tend to overconsume protein. They're not getting enough fiber. They're not getting enough water. So you're negating the very things that would decrease inflammation and potentially decrease your oxidative stress in the body and decrease your risk of cancer. So I think we have to be very cautious with these diets. I know they have jump-started a lot of people, on their weight loss journey, but I don't think that it's a great long-term solution unless you make sure that the meat is clean, that it's lean, that you're balancing things out, making your plate colorful with fruits, vegetables, and getting that water. And I say everything with the caveat that there may be exceptions. I know there are seizure patients, for example, that in certain neurological conditions where they do want those patients to go into ketosis for various medical reasons, but I think that is still balanced out with some of the other anti-inflammatory foods. So I'm going to stop there because I see some hands and some nods.
Great. Well, thank you for being so clear with that answer as well. I know we did want to talk about food additives and processed foods. I see some typing. I don't see questions come up, so I'll keep an eye on the question box. Let me first just say, does anyone have a hand up or want to ask a question? Okay, Latha, you'd like to make a comment? Go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to just make a comment to your question that you asked me and the diet discussions. I think there will be a day where we will be able to have some wearables or home-based sort of insights or testing along with a platform like Pandora, which can tell you what type of diet is good for you and what actually is your diet. And that recommendation may not even be a consistent long-term recommendation because our body changes. Our body changes constantly. And to go back to what was said before, recommendation for the amount of protein in your postmenopausal time, along with the recommendations for the calcium, exercise, all of those for osteoporosis prevention, they all change. So I think, again, I just wanted to say that the personalization will evolve over time.
Great.
I just wanted to also add that I think, Vicky, I'm just going to go back to Vicky's question because I think it's really important. And one of the reasons we created this platform was to answer questions specific to people. And one of the things I love about it is that when you answer a few questions on our platform and you go onto our platform, if you ask the AI agent, say, I'm concerned about these things, and they've already taken your history, they can print out like a menu for you about what you can eat. And so it's such a great way to be able to personalize your recipe. It can even, and you ask like, what's a shopping list? It can create a shopping list, and it's all based on the questions you've answered. You can actually even upload your data. Like if you have test results or something you want to upload, then that will be taken into account. So our goal is really to create it very, very personalized. And the more people use it, the better it will get. So it's not an end product just yet, but I have the same issues that Vicky does. And I've met with a lot of people who've been like, I'm postmenopausal. I need to get more protein. I need to get more fiber, but I physically cannot eat it all in one day. How can I do that? And so you can come up with creative solutions like eat a smoothie and you put all these things in. It's much easier to digest. So I think a nice way to answer these questions is to start with just playing around with that agent and see, do you get good answers from it, and meeting with our kind of gut guru to help you walk through it. But that's exactly why we created this platform, because it's really hard to find those answers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, Vicky asks exactly this, and it sounds like you've answered at least part of her question, which is, can you get a comprehensive plan that is specific to you and your conditions and what life stage you're in? And I know we need to go back to the food additives thing. I feel like the the suspense is building, and it's like, but I do think it's an important thing for us to get back to. But something that Vicky touches on is her doctor, says her doctor doesn't seem to be taking a holistic approach. And so, Asma, what do you do when your doctor isn't, taking all of these things into account, and you feel like maybe you're not being heard or being undermined, or maybe they're just not, thinking like that. They don't come from that school of thought. So, what do you do in those cases?
So I think, first of all, you should maybe kind of be very direct to your physician if you're talking to a physician about what you need. Like say exactly like, this is what I'm looking for. Because sometimes you're in an office visit and at the very end, somebody's asking you a question and you thought the question was different. So maybe they just don't realize that that's what you're looking for. So I often say that up front. I'm like, what do you want out of, like, what kind of treatments are you looking for or whatever? Or see maybe a dietitian. Maybe if that's your, first goal is like, let me start with like food. So maybe see a good dietitian who specializes in autoimmune diseases. We do have dietitians that specialize in IBS and gut-directed issues. But, Vicky brings up a very good point. There is the care is so fragmented that you have to go to a dietitian, then you'd have to go to a pelvic floor therapist, and then you'd have to go to your gastroenterologist, and your primary care doesn't have time to worry about everyone, so they farm you out to everybody. So literally, that's why we wanted to create this platform, because I think that we all understand, at least those of us on the call, that the gut is a centerpiece, but it affects many parts of your body. And so we ask about hormones, we ask about, your childbirth, we ask about how much sleep you get. And our goal is to do that for you. And, but I think it's hard to find it. And I feel for you because I think it's not easy. But ultimately, I will say to Vicky that a lot of these underlying principles for any kind of chronic condition, whether it's autoimmune, rheumatoid arthritis, specifically IBS, the basics are the same. Like it's eating well, getting sleep, getting the right exercises, doing the right kind of training. And so if you get that holistic background for any kind of condition you have, it can put you one step above like where you were.
Great. Thank you. And then, yeah, I think let's talk a bit about modern food, the food industry. And I'll go back to Asia, but I think it would be great if all of you weigh in. How do you eat healthily and eat well and avoid these things when it feels like so much of what you see in the supermarket is processed and contains all sorts of ingredients that you would not expect to be in food necessarily? And I think another element is cost. When this is the food that is often accessible and convenient, what do you do and how do you avoid this stuff? And what does it do? What's the harm of a diet that includes most of these foods?
Yeah. So I'll tell you, a couple years ago, there was a diet for Crohn's disease. It was called the Crohn's disease exclusion diet. I don't know if my colleagues remember this, but it was very exciting because with this particular diet, I believe it was out of Italy. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But they were able, a group of scientists and gastroenterologists were able to basically improve inflammation, truly improve inflammation in Crohn's disease, which is challenging in adults with diet alone. In children, there are some very basic elemental diets where if they stay on these diets that are fairly clean, that they can get disease under control. But in adults, because of the complexity and the years of exposure, it's much more difficult. But one of the first sort of principles in that diet was taking out emulsifiers. And so this is where I was like, okay, what exactly are these emulsifiers? And they're thickeners. And so that was sort of the first part of this whole discovery. It's these food additives and the emulsifiers were the first steps in the diet to remove. That was the first thing you were to remove. So fast forward, there were some researchers in inflammatory bowel disease out of the Cleveland Clinic that had looked at a particular, like they were doing mice studies, And what they found, or what they thought they had found, was that in Black patients, there was this increase in this particular yeast, which is called Saccharomyces. And with that particular yeast, it was found in the ileum with increased frequency. And the ileum is a part of the small intestines in the Black and brown communities. And it was hypothesized that it was basically this particular yeast, which was a foodborne pathogen that was contributing to the increased rates of inflammatory bowel disease in Crohn's in Black and brown communities. And we were seeing, and we continue to see, 134% increase in the populations. So I raised my hand then and I said, well, where is this particular product found? Like, how can I share this with my patients as maybe an easy first step to remove this particular culprit? And they said, well, it's in smoked meats and aged cheeses. And so I said, okay. So about a year later, I see the researcher and I said, so how's it going? Is this still looking like it may be a culprit? And if so, how can I basically encourage my patients to remove this? And he said, it is everywhere. It is sprayed on our food. It's basically used as a pesticide. And so I was sort of heartbroken. But my personal experience was also that when I was exposed to MSG at certain restaurants, I was becoming very sick. Like, I would get a headache, I would become flushed, I had to one time vomit. And so that's when I started looking very closely at food. And if you look at sort of the overall statistics, 2/3 of Americans suffer from some type of gut issue on an ongoing basis. And 40% of America suffers from disruptive symptoms, where they have to change what they're doing or do some type of lifestyle modification because of this. And so our genes haven't changed over time, but our environment and our food has. And so when you start to go and look at the labels then to say, okay, let me remove these fake foods, that's when it becomes kind of scary, because you're right. Most of our foods in the grocery store, they usually tell you to stay outside the middle, sort of shop on the periphery to get the healthiest foods that there are. But the things in the middle, definitely, when you turn over and look at the food label, it certainly looks like a science experiment. It's, it does not take, 200 ingredients to make a biscuit in my house. So, you may get these biscuits that you're supposed to just be able to add some water to, and it's literally over 200 ingredients, and it says it's bioengineered. And a couple years ago, the FDA basically mandated that, there is some label that's put on the food, but they don't have to say what is bioengineered. It just has to say that it contains a bioengineered ingredient. And so it's very difficult. It's very difficult to really eat clean. And then if you can try to get as close to Mother Nature as possible with the organic foods, but they are quite costly. I think because, though, there is some hope in that, our hyper awareness to what's going on has caused a little bit of a mindset shift, not only in the government and the FDA looking at these, starting with the removal of certain food dyes, but also some of the companies are basically shifting their production to be cleaner. So now they're saying, we don't contain this. We don't contain any food coloring. We're clean. We don't have the additives. So the good thing is we are aware. The bad thing is we have a long way to go, and it is quite costly right now to stay on the cleaner side of things. So I'm going to pause there. But our immune systems don't know what to do with all of this fake stuff. So it's basically activating us. It's triggering our immune system, and we're running into a lot of issues.
I like that, the sort of competitive incentive, so if there are companies who are coming out and talking about being organic and clean, it sort of, it pressures other companies into being like, well, so what about you?
Right.
Like, where do you sit? I think what scared me is, as you say, that there's the middle aisle stuff, but then there's also what you would consider natural whole foods that have to preserve them, or I remember finding out a few years ago that often salmon that you see, if it's farm raised salmon, will be dyed pink. Yeah. So it's also just in food that you think looks like what it should look like, And then when you read the label, you figure out that not all of that is completely natural.
Not only that, Aisha, but I know, like, you were across the pond, but when we have patients that suffer from all of these gut issues, the minute they go across the pond, they don't have the same issues. My family was in Greece last year, and we were cooking with a Greek family, and we made everything from scratch, including our bread. And the lady basically said, we feel very sorry for you guys that, you're eating these terrible foods, that it's allowed to be a part of your food supply chain, and had no gut issues over there. And that's often the story of my patients that get to travel abroad, is that they don't suffer in the same way until they get back and resume our sort of Western diet.
Yeah. I can imagine how jarring that is, the feeling that, like, when I go back and I eat the same things, I'm gonna feel all of these negative symptoms. And I think also can imagine how that just results in a distrust of the food industry, which is a very scary space to be in. Latha, you had your hand up as well.
I just wanted to add 2 lines to that, which is that I think we all know this, but wanted to point out that the dietary descriptions or details that Asia and you just discussed disproportionately affect the lower socioeconomic status and those that live in inner cities because of the food deserts, and also because of the autoimmune conditions being higher in women and the totally processed industrialized foods affecting our gut microbiome. Women are more disproportionately affected by these diets or lack of access to the healthy food. So just wanted to make sure that we all keep that at the top of our mind when we're discussing this with wherever especially when we're talking to local businesses and grocery stores, etc.
Thanks, Latha. I'm gonna move on from diet a little bit, and Asma, I'm going to ask you about symptoms and red flags that women in particular should watch out for. A lot of the questions that we get through the platform and that I see on social media and in other forums are just around, I'm feeling this, is this normal? When should I be concerned? Should I be concerned? When should I consult a doctor? So what are some red flags for you where, it's just people should go and seek professional medical, clinical help?
So I think, things just kind of generically to be aware of is if you've had a sudden, like, significant weight loss, for example, where something is just not make sense and you're not trying to lose weight, or if you have specific symptoms that have been occurring quickly and are deteriorating quickly, I think those need to be evaluated regardless of what they are in general from a full body system. From a gut standpoint, I think there are big kind of red flags. Like if you have bleeding, I mean, that's sort of a non-starter. Like you have to go see them. If there have abnormalities in your blood work, like anemia, for instance. If you are having anything that really impacts your quality and function of your life. So if you cannot, get up and go to work during the day, if you're coming home in the middle of your work day, things like that. But I feel like those are kind of basics that you can start with. And then I think you should have a low threshold to see your doctor. We have good medical care in the US, and I think it's important to, see your doctor. And our goal is to kind of, help that journey along the way and support you and kind of in between those visits as well.
Yeah, you make it a great point. You make a great point, Asma. We always want to make sure that people are still getting those regular touch points. There's so much preventive care that needs to take place. And also we want to be able to catch anything that's going on early. So we want to be a partner in that journey and a companion in that journey and sort of bridge the patient and the traditional healthcare system and marry all of those aspects that will holistically make people better. Because we're not going to stop being doctors just because we have a platform, because all of those different touch points matter.
And I think, the reality of like the medical system right now is doctors are overburdened. They don't have a lot of time to spend with patients. And we all wish we could spend more time, and I do spend time with my patients, but there's so much I wish I could tell them. And I think this is our way of sort of being able to spread that news and support people, even though they're not physically in the doctor's office.
Yep.
Awesome. I see Samantha.
And can I just make one? Oh, sorry. I saw Samantha's question here, and she said, I have MS and I crave sugar a lot. I will eat fruit instead of snack cakes or candy. And I think that's like a great solution. And I was going to say, I tend not to be all doom and gloom about the food industry, because I feel like you got to deal with what you have. And so my goal is to eat like 5 different plants a day. So whatever that is, and it allows me to like eat interesting things. And then I do that too. When I crave sugar, I actually eat these like yogurt bars, and they're my new dessert because I used to eat chocolate every night. And so they give me extra protein, and they're like a good substitute. So I think it's this chance to be creative and find things that you don't necessarily like, you wouldn't necessarily eat. Or I've gone to like, the Asian grocery store and gotten like different types of like fruit that I normally don't eat. So papaya has been in my house this week and like things. So that's sort of my evolution of diet in this day and age.
Great. And Latha and Aisha, how about you? What are some of your workarounds for when you have cravings of for sugar or other things? Are there any little snacks or portions or ways that you work with those things?
I think fruits, definitely. I just came back from overseas travel, and I stopped in Middle East on my flight. So the layover allowed me to buy dates. That's a good way to fix your sugar craving as well without too much sugar. But I think like any food, eating something that's a piece of chocolate or a piece of sweet very slowly satiates you, meaning not just gobble the whole thing down, but really enjoying that one little piece will go a long way in making you feel like, okay, I had something. But I'm not a huge chocolate person. I don't usually eat chocolate and rarely candy. So that actually helps me because I just naturally don't gravitate towards them. But I do crave sweets, and I'll make do with fruit. And I don't feel like I've given up on something. And I find a good restaurant with a good dessert, I definitely will indulge in that. So that's what my way of sort of making up.
I like that, Latha. So the one food that is a chocolate that's good for your microbiome is dark chocolate. So if you can get the 100% or 70% or greater dark chocolate, for those that do like chocolate, it is very healthy for you, very good for you, may give you a little endorphin release as well. And I think that's a good little hack. But what I've put in my office, so about 10 o'clock in the morning, we get very hungry in the office. We start asking if we have lunch coming. And so I have in the break room purchased a big oatmeal container. And it's, basically ancient oats, ground flaxseed. So you don't have to necessarily digest the flaxseed, ground chia, or the black chia seeds, pure honey from a local farmer that has, a bee farm. And we mix all that in, and I'll get the toppings like the dry cranberries. So depending on how much of a sweet tooth you're having that day, you can really get satiated. You can sort of, fix your sugar cravings with all of these things that maybe, they do contain a higher amount of sugar, but all of it is whole foods, and it's probably not going to kill you. Those are realistic steps that I think you can take. And everybody has access to it in the office. I'm like, this is not just mine. When anybody gets these cravings, instead of the donuts, we can get a bowl of this oatmeal. And oftentimes you'll notice that when you have that, it's quite satisfying. You drink your water. I loved Latha's note about mindful eating, because it does make a difference. Like if you just take a minute digestion starts in the mouth. And even before that, when you kind of prepare your mind to receive the food, there's increase in salivary production that helps you to basically release those first digestive enzymes. And then on downward, you prepare your stomach to receive the food, and it's a more efficient and better way of eating. And your digestion will be much smoother that way. You'll recognize when you're full. There's some hormones that you need to be in tune with to even know that you're not hungry anymore. So just slowing down is an excellent recommendation as well.
Thank you. And I like that you mentioned water as well. I find often that when I think I'm craving something sweet, often I'm thirsty. And so it's just like, first have a drink of water and then see if you still feel like that. And often it takes care of it. I see Vicky had a question about her stool sample score. I just wanted to say, I see, Asma, you've answered it, but we do, of course, have through the platform our gut wellness score, in which case 75 is a very good score, among some of the top we've seen. And then there's stool samples as in kits. And so I wanted to also just ask very, very briefly, and maybe I'll ask Latha about, interpretation. And I know we talked about this a little bit, but how do you place yourself against other people with kits like this? And then after this, I'm going to go into a few quick fire questions for everyone.
I think, again, just like we individualized, we talked about how individualizing recommendations is so important from all different aspects. Looking at a gut score with a personal or individual traits is very important. In terms of the stool kits, as we've talked about in the past and has been mentioned, there isn't a clear gold standard, but we do know what's normal or what looks close to a normal. Basically, having good diversity in our microbiome is a representation of a healthy gut or a more balanced gut. And that oftentimes is achieved by the 5 different plant foods and maintaining good diet, et cetera, and everything else like the hormones and the stress and all of those things affect our microbiome. So in terms of the score, I would say as long as the symptoms are in reasonable control and there's a good mix of microbiome, that's a good, and I would not worry too much about the score itself.
Thanks, Latha. Candice asked if juicing is good for you. Who wants to take this one?
I think as long as it's a whole fruit and you're consuming what we are saying is healthy and just in a juice form, I think that's a good thing. I'm in general a proponent of that as long as you're making no other modifications, not adding a ton of sugar or honey or something else to make it more palatable. I think that's a healthy thing to do. And if there are ways you can get healthy protein into that juice and make it more into a smoothie, that's also a good mechanism of getting stuff in, especially for those that are busy and can't sit in one place and eat something. I think that's a very good way to get it in. I don't know if Aisha or Asma have anything to add.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I do like the idea of juicing because I think it sort of beats some of the alternatives of what people can be consuming, and they tend to be very mindful when they're juicing of other things that they're putting in their body. And that's why when you look at a bunch of these different diets over time, there's probably not a huge difference. It's because of the mindfulness that we talked about, and people are being intentional about what they put in their body. So they've done a ton of studies comparing, carnivore to Mediterranean to this and that. And really is sort of adherence to these things that make a difference over a 1-year period. With that being said, with the juicing, I do want to make people aware that like in the prebiotic group, for example, like pectin is one of those things. And, the apple skin, for example, has some nutrients, and, the pulp in the orange has some nutrients. So we do want to be careful as to not remove all of the different aspects of the fruit, because each aspect of the fruit contains something, like the skin of the potato, for example. So the whole fruit and vegetable does tend to have some nutritional value. So if you are just juicing and just extracting the juice, then you may miss out on some of those other nutrients that the whole food contains. I don't know if Asma has anything to add to that.
Nope, I agree with everything you guys said. I will just say one last thing is that juicing sometimes is easier for people to tolerate and to get it in. So sometimes if you have a lot of GI issues, as I do, I find smoothies are really helpful, as well as things like juicing, because it's easier to digest. So, but I do agree that you can't forget like the entire fruit, or all the other all the other benefits of whole fruits and vegetables.
Oh, thanks. And thanks, Candice, for asking that question. So I'm going to go into a few quick fire questions. So just a few seconds answer, and I'll ask 2 rounds of questions, and I'll ask everyone. So the first one is that we've talked about food, so what goes into the top of your GI tract. We've talked about digestion and symptoms and all of that stuff, and we haven't really talked so much about what comes through the other end. And it is often something that people feel, you know, embarrassed, shy, whatever it is. So I wanted to ask you, you know, this is the field that you're in and you need to have these conversations. So what are some of the things that your patients may be reluctant to talk about, or may need some help opening up about, that really shouldn't be, you know, embarrassing, or they shouldn't feel any shame speaking through? And maybe again, Asma, you go, Aisha, and then Latha.
One of the things that people don't like talking about and you have to ask about is digital manipulation to get out stool. So that's actually something that people do. And so you have to ask about it.
I would say people need to talk more openly about sharding and having accidents. That's something that I ask my patients about on a regular basis.
I would say that I would go the clean version, the farting, because not many people talk about passing gas or how much it bothers them, and quote unquote a stinky gas, because that represents a specific issue.
Thank you. Those are all great. And then the second round of quickfire. So what would you say, for you personally? We've talked about, you know, supplements and tests and sort of your own practices, but what would you say are some supplements that are your go-tos first? And then are there any supplements that you use that you would be reluctant to admit openly to your peers that you use and perhaps swear by? So anything that you like is your go-to, and then anything where, yeah, it's your go-to, but you're not going to necessarily shout it from the rooftops. And again, maybe Asma, Aisha, Latha.
So my go-to is I put fiber in my coffee. It's changed my life. And I use like Benefiber is one that dissolves in your coffee. So I use something easy, quick, do it every day. My husband started doing it. The nurses in my office started doing it after hearing patients talk about it. So that's one. I suck at taking pills at all. So I cannot take anything. So there's nothing else that I do that I think I can even tell you that I would admit, because I'm a really bad patient and a really bad caretaker of myself.
Uh-oh.
I'll go next. I take vitamin D, but you can overdose on vitamin D. So you want to make sure that you have your levels checked if you're taking that. But low vitamin D levels are more common in African Americans and Black patients, darker skin, especially in the winter. And I had found that I was itching, like I had this inexplicable like itching in the winter, and called a friend of mine who was a hematologist oncologist, and she said, start taking some vitamin D. I did that and it resolved. I know it sounds crazy, but it's also low vitamin D levels are linked to a lot of diseases, including inflammation. So I take vitamin D, and then I will take some magnesium calm at night. It helps with bowel movements, and it helps with excitability of the nerve endings. So the magnesium is something that I take, and unless you have some kidney problems, you should pretty much balance it out if you otherwise don't need it. You would just excrete it.
Well, I feel like a pill popper, and after I heard younger women. I take the vitamin D, especially actually a slightly on the higher dose because of my osteoporosis and the recommendation to keep your vitamin D at a higher end of the range rather than at the lower end of the range. And number two, I also take magnesium. It actually started helping the mild constipation and palpitations that began with my peri-menopause and menopause, and I continue to take it every night. One that I take that I don't always share, but when asked, I will definitely share is Nutrafol or any sort of a hair growth supplement. I wouldn't say I'm endorsing Nutrafol, but it is a hair growth supplement that I seem to have tolerated and seem to be helping. Yeah, those are the three things that I take.
And can I just jump in with one thing? It's not something I take, but I will. My co-founders know exactly what I'm going to say, but I have a bidet at home, and I think everybody should have what I call a Japanese toilet. And like, if you don't, it will change your life. But I won't really share that to everybody I know.
Yes, you will.
You did. I want to be their spokesperson, but I don't think that's like, that they haven't, Toto has not called me yet.
No, we called her the bidet cheerleader.
Well, I'm sure everyone was taking notes, so thank you. And then I think as we wrap up in the last few minutes, if anyone does have burning questions, please, this is your last minute or two to ask. So please do. I see some typing and then not typing. So please do ask if you have any last questions. While you do that, I'm going to ask the team just things that you're optimistic about. So what makes you optimistic about this space? What are you excited about? It could be the general trend where things are moving and what you're seeing today, or it could be a particular innovation. Apart from Pandora Health, we're all very excited about Pandora Health, so we won't mention our own company. But what makes you excited when you think about the future? I'll Aisha, Asma, and Aisha, Latha, Asma. And then I do see some typing. So if there are any questions in between, I might just stop and ask us to take that.
Yeah, I love that women are taking control of their narrative. I love that they're empowered, that they're seeking knowledge on their own. And simultaneously, I love the innovation that's coming to the market that allows women, that equips them with tools so that they can track, learn, be educated, so that by the time they do see a physician or their healthcare provider, they are better equipped to make sure that the visit is effective, efficient, that they have their questions answered, and that they get what they need out of that particular experience. And as I always say, healthcare should be an experience like everything else.
Speaking more from a broader sense, I am excited to see the focus on women's health. I think we've let generations down without real focus on many of the aspects that need to be, individualized or catered to specifically for women. And I also think that the industry, broadly, but also companies, are realizing that investing in women's health is important because of the effect it has on economies within the small microstructure, but also globally. And I think the disease burden in women who live long has added to the cost of healthcare. And so in general, I'm excited about the focus, which I'm hoping will bring real solutions and help women live healthier as they live long.
Great. Thanks, Latha.
So, I just think that there's so much to come. I think microbiome is sort of the new frontier. I think wearables will predict disease flares and condition flares. And I think all of that will be incorporated in women's health with, helping with managing menopause and all of the hormonal kind of variations that women have. So I think there's a new awakening with technology and a new awakening with women's health that's going to see like really exciting things in the future.
Awesome. Thanks, Latha. And Radha says the exciting info on the microbiome and its effects on all aspects of health, which I can absolutely support that as well. Elizabeth also said, appreciate the helpful info. Can't wait to see all Pandora has to offer. Elizabeth is a PT who specializes in pelvic floor, and so hopefully she will be part of one of our upcoming webinars soon. So yeah, absolutely appreciate all of your support and input as well. And thank you, everyone. We are 1 minute over time, so I'll wrap up just by saying thank you so much for being part of this webinar. Please do engage with the community, ask each other questions, ask our specialists and gut gurus questions, and we're really excited to continue engaging and participating in this really exciting exploration into the link between technology and gut health and community. So thanks again for all joining. We'll see you soon. Thank you to our brilliant clinician and co-founders, Aisha, Asma, Latha, and we will see you all soon.
Thanks, Aisha. This was fun.
Thank you.